Half the songs on the radio in the 70s weren't about what you thought they were about. Parents tapped along in the car. Kids sang the choruses at school. Nobody looked too closely at the words. So today, we're counting down 12 famous music artists from the 1970s people didn't realize were filthy. Number 12, Muskrat Love by Captain and Tennille.
Looks like Muskrat Love.
Let's start with the strangest one on the list. Muskrat Love was written by a Texan named Willis Allen Ramsey in 1972 under the title Muskrat Candlelight, and it went nowhere. The band America covered it in 1973 and got to number 67. Then Captain and Tennille, the most wholesome act in America, put it on their 1976 album Song of Joy and took it to number 4. Here is the thing almost nobody stopped to consider at the time. The song is not a metaphor. It is about two muskrats named Susie and Sam, and it describes, in some detail, what the two of them get up to together. There are synthesizer noises near the end meant to represent exactly that, and on the original single, those noises were cut into the run-out groove, so if you didn't lift the needle, they simply looped for as long as you let them.
Muskrat Susie, Muskrat Sam.
Then it went to the White House. In July 1976, during the bicentennial, Tony Tennille and Daryl Dragon performed at a state dinner in the East Room for Queen Elizabeth II, Prince Philip, President Ford, and Henry Kissinger. Tennille later said she chose Muskrat Love because the First Lady's own request had struck her as too suggestive for the occasion. The press had a field day, quoting one dinner guest who called it very poor taste to sing about mating muskrats in front of the Queen. Tennille's response was that only a person with a dirty mind would see anything wrong with it, and that it was a gentle, Disney-ish sort of song. By her own account of that evening, Kissinger looked miserable throughout, and the Queen nodded off. Prince Philip shook her hand afterwards and was perfectly charming about it. Years later, she and Dragon would run into the Fords in California, and the former president would introduce them as the couple who sang the song about the mice.
Looks like Muskrat Love.
Number 11, Escape, the Pina Colada song by Rupert Holmes.
If you like Pina Coladas.
Rupert Holmes was a New York songwriter, arranger, and producer who had worked with everyone from Barbra Streisand to the Drifters, and who was finishing an album with one song still missing. He wrote it at the last minute, about a bored man who reads the personal advertisements at the back of his newspaper, answers one, and arranges to meet a stranger at a bar. He needed a drink for the lyric and originally wrote in a different cocktail altogether. It didn't sing well, so he flipped to a pina colada, which was the fashionable thing to be ordering at the time, and left it in as a placeholder he fully intended to replace and never got round to changing. The record company called the song Escape. Everyone else immediately called it the Pina Colada song, and the title was eventually amended on the sleeve to accommodate them.
If you're not into yoga,
For 40-odd years, it has been treated as a breezy holiday record, the sort of thing played over a slideshow of a beach. The plot is that a man in a relationship arranges to cheat on his partner with a woman he has never met, turns up at the bar, and discovers that the woman waiting for him is his own partner, who has been doing exactly the same thing. They laugh about it. That's the happy ending. It reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 on December 22, 1979, making it the final chart topper of the decade, then slipped for a week and climbed back to the top in January 1980. Holmes never had another hit anywhere near it and went on to a substantial second career writing for the stage, winning Tony Awards for a Broadway musical. The song, meanwhile, has never left the air. It remains one of the most played feel-good records on oldies radio anywhere in the world, requested constantly by people who have somehow never followed the story to its conclusion.
if you like Pina Coladas.
Number 10, Tush by ZZ Top.
I've been bad, I've been good, Dallas, Texas.
On May 23, 1974, ZZ Top were setting up in a rodeo arena with a dirt floor in Florence, Alabama, hours before a show. Billy Gibbons started playing a blues shuffle to warm up. Their lighting director twirled a finger in the air to tell them to keep going. And Dusty Hill leaned over and asked what they were going to call the thing. They wrote it there, in roughly 10 minutes, off the top of Hill's head. The band had a habit of taping their sound checks on a little cassette recorder in case something turned up, and this time, something did. Hill admitted later they were only messing about, and that the words were never going to trouble Bob Dylan. Only a couple of words changed before they recorded it, and the finished version is essentially what happened in that arena. Tush came out in July 1975 as the only single from Fandango, an album that was half live recordings and half new studio material. It entered the Hot 100 at number 79 and peaked at number 20 that August, the band's first top 40 hit and their biggest, until Legs 9 years later. It pushed the album into the top 10 and turned ZZ Top into a stadium act. Gibbons has always maintained the title came from a 1966 Roy Head B-side called Tush Hog, and that in the American South the word meant deluxe or plush, so that a tush hog was something very fine indeed. That is genuinely true. It is also true that the word means something else entirely, that Dusty Hill was singing about looking for a woman in a bar, and that ZZ Top built a whole career on exactly this trick. Pearl Necklace and Tube Snake Boogie came later, and both work on the same principle. Two meanings, one of them clean enough to keep the record on the radio. Number 9, Squeezebox by The Who. Pete Townshend bought himself an accordion one day in the mid-70s, taught himself to play it, and wrote a song in about 10 minutes for his own amusement. He didn't even include it in the batch he presented to Roger Daltrey for the new album. It was Ronnie Lane, his old friend from the Small Faces, who told him he'd be mad not to record it. They cut it at Shepperton on May 30th, 1975, with Glyn Johns producing and Townshend picking a banjo, which ended up as the dominant sound on the record. For a song named after an accordion, there is remarkably little accordion on it. It came out in America that November and in Britain in January 1976, reaching number 16 on the Hot 100 and number 10 in the UK. It was The Who's first British top 10 single since 1972 and went to number 1 in Canada. A squeezebox is an accordion. It is also, and Townshend has said so plainly, a piece of slang he'd heard used for a part of a woman's body. He described the lyric in his own liner notes as a poorly aimed dirty joke and told an interviewer in 1978 that the whole thing started from overhearing that expression. The song had originally been intended for a television special that never happened, in which the band were to be surrounded by 100 topless women playing accordions. Townshend has since tried to walk it back, insisting at one point that there was no double meaning at all, and that it wasn't about anybody's anatomy. John Entwistle's contribution to the debate was that most songs have double meanings, or no meaning whatsoever, and that this one wasn't especially dirty. What's remarkable is how completely it slipped past. It became a family-friendly radio staple, and Daltrey's only public comment on the matter was that there was nothing wrong with a bit of in and out. Number 8, Big 10-Inch Record by Aerosmith. This one was already ancient by the time Aerosmith got hold of it. A songwriter named Fred Wisemantel wrote it, and Bull Moose Jackson recorded it in Cincinnati on October 6, 1952 with Tiny Bradshaw's orchestra. It reached number 2 on the R&B chart and got almost no pop airplay, for reasons anybody hearing it would grasp immediately. It came out on a 10-inch 78, which is the entire joke. Steven Tyler heard it more than 20 years later. On a cassette a friend had taped off Dr. Demento's radio show in Los Angeles and posted to him while the band were on the road. Tyler was struggling to finish lyrics for the album they were making, so covering somebody else's song took a certain amount of pressure off. Aerosmith cut it for Toys in the Attic, released April 8, 1975, and they didn't rock it up. Brad Whitford said their producer told them to do it exactly the way it had been done in 1952, horns and all. Tyler plays harmonica on it. The narrator spends the entire song describing how he keeps a certain woman happy. and every listener is meant to assume he's talking about one thing before the punchline reveals he means a phonograph record, or claims to. It was never released as a single, which is probably why it sat on that album quietly for decades while Sweet Emotion and Walk This Way did the heavy lifting. One critic at the time predicted, not entirely seriously, that it would be the only Aerosmith song anybody would still be playing in 100 years. Bull Moose Jackson, meanwhile, had been a big band crooner who ended up working in a Washington restaurant before a group of young fans tracked him down in the 80s and put him back on stage. Number 7. Afternoon Delight by Starland Vocal Band. Bill Danoff was eating at Clyde's, a restaurant in Georgetown, Washington, D.C., where he and his wife Taffy sometimes performed. The place had a happy hour menu headed Afternoon Delights, offering things like spiced shrimp and hot brie with almonds. The phrase lodged in his head, and not because of the shrimp. He worked on the song for about 6 months, often on Sunday afternoons while watching Washington play football, which he said got his creative juices going. He brought Taffy in, then recruited 2 more singers from the local folk scene, John Carroll and Margot Chapman, and the 4 of them became Starland Vocal Band. They signed to John Denver's label, and Danoff had already co-written Take Me Home Country Roads with him.
Skyrockets in flight. Afternoon.
Released in April 1976, it went to number 1 on July 10th. The 4-part harmonies were so sunny, and the fireworks imagery landed so perfectly in the middle of the bicentennial summer that an enormous number of listeners heard a patriotic sing-along. It is a song about having sex in the middle of the day. Danoff has said he didn't want an outright sex song, only something fun that hinted at it, and that the writing process itself was far from romantic. Billboard later ranked it the 20th sexiest song ever recorded. The group won the 1976 Grammy for Best New Artist, beating Boston, whose debut album went on to become one of the best-selling in American history. It was that win, more than any other, that started people talking about the Best New Artist curse. They performed the song at Oral Roberts University, had a variety show that lasted 6 weeks, and never had another hit. Number 6. Roxanne by The Police. In October 1977, The Police were 3 broke musicians sharing a room in a cheap hotel near the Gare du Nord in Paris, booked to play a small gig with the Damned. Sting wandered out into the alleyway one night and saw street prostitution for the first time in his life. He said afterwards he was struck by how beautiful the women were and began imagining what it would be like to fall in love with one of them. Back in the hotel foyer, there was an old poster for Cyrano de Bergerac, the play in which the hero adores a woman named Roxanne from a distance. Sting put the 2 things together. Stuart Copeland suggested the tango rhythm that gives the record its shape. The single came out on April 14, 1978, and did absolutely nothing. The BBC declined to add it to the playlist because of the subject matter, and without that support, it failed to chart in Britain at all. A&M turned the situation into a marketing angle, printing posters reading "Banned by the BBC," which annoyed the band considerably. Sting's own view was that there was nothing smutty in it, that it was a real song with a real feeling, and that the corporation had refused it purely because it was about a prostitute. A radio station in Texas picked it up. Other American stations followed, and the record eventually made the band. Re-released in Britain the following year with proper promotion behind it, it finally reached number 12. One last detail. The odd piano clang and burst of laughter at the very start of the record was an accident. Sting sat down on a studio piano thinking the lid was closed. He liked it enough to leave it in. It went into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 2008. Number 5. Bad Girls by Donna Summer. In 1977, Donna Summer was working out of an office at Casablanca Records in Los Angeles, the only artist the label let keep one there. She sent a young secretary from the PR department out on an errand along Sunset Boulevard. The woman came back shaken. Police had stopped her, in business clothes, on the assumption that she was a prostitute. Summer was furious, and she wrote a song about it. Not a song condemning anybody, but one that put itself in the position of the women actually working that street. She said later that her compassion tended to run ahead of her information, and that when you look at somebody, your heart identifies with their pain before you know why. Neil Bogart, who ran Casablanca, heard the demo and thought it was too rock and roll and not danceable enough. He wanted to hand it to Cher. Summer, who had recorded it with her future husband Bruce Sudano and the group Brooklyn Dreams, said no. She loved Cher, she explained years afterwards. But Cher was not having her song. It sat on a shelf for 2 years, until an engineer dug the tape out and she had all but forgotten it existed. Released on June 23, 1979. It went to number 1 on the Hot 100 and stayed 3 weeks, and the album spent 5 weeks at the top. That summer, Summer became the first woman ever to have 2 songs sitting in the top 3 of the Hot 100 at once, as Hot Stuff slipped to number 2, and this one climbed to number 3. Those car horn noises everybody imitates were Summer's own idea, meant to be the sound of men calling out to women from cars on the sidewalk. Millions of people danced to it at weddings for the next 40 years, without ever registering what the girls in the title actually do for a living. Number 4. Tonight's the Night, Gonna Be Alright, by Rod Stewart.
Tonight's the night.
Rod Stewart woke in the middle of the night with this one, and reached for the notepad and cassette recorder he kept by the bed. He and Steve Cropper worked out the arrangement on a Friday morning, had it recorded by Friday night, and finished the words the next evening. The backing was cut at Muscle Shoals Sound Studio in Alabama. It's a seduction song, and it makes very little effort to be anything else. Stewart is coaxing an inexperienced young woman into bed, and the second verse contains a line about coming inside that no broadcaster in 1976 could pretend not to hear. The BBC objected specifically to that line. Several American stations refused to play it, some simply because listeners had complained. The whispered French at the end was Stewart's then-girlfriend, the Swedish actress Britt Ekland. He has told the story both ways over the years, once joking that she threatened to sue if he left her off, and once admitting to Mojo in 1995 that she hadn't wanted to do it, and he'd got her thoroughly drunk first. Asked whether she'd received royalties, he said he'd bought her a nice frock. None of the bands held. As the record climbed, the BBC quietly reversed itself. It reached number 1 on November 13, 1976, and sat there for 8 straight weeks. The longest run at the top by any single since Hey Jude in 1968, and the longest of Stewart's entire career. It knocked the Steve Miller Band off the summit and was itself finally displaced in January by Marilyn McCoo and Billy Davis Jr. It was the best-selling single of 1977 and topped Billboard's year-end chart. Stewart has since said, plainly, that he couldn't write a song like it.
Tonight's the night.
Now, number 3, Walk on the Wild Side, by Lou Reed.
Honey, you take a walk on the wild side. And the public...
Lou Reed wrote this for Transformer in 1972, produced by David Bowie and Mick Ronson, and it began life as something else entirely. He had been asked to write songs for a stage adaptation of a Nelson Algren novel. The project collapsed, and he kept the title. Every verse is about a real person he had known around Andy Warhol's factory in New York. Holly, Candy, Little Joe, Sugar Plum Fairy, Jackie. Their real names are a matter of record, and their lives were exactly as difficult as the song suggests. Across 4 minutes, it covers a young person hitchhiking across America and transitioning, sex work, hustling, drug use, and, in one line that has become notorious, a specific sexual act named in plain English with no metaphor anywhere near it. Herbie Flowers played the 2 bass parts that make the whole thing float, doubling an upright with an electric, and the saxophone solo belongs to Ronnie Ross, who had once given the young David Bowie lessons in South London.
You take a walk on the wild side.
The extraordinary part is what happened next. British radio played it, cheerfully, in daytime. Tony Blackburn, the most mainstream disc jockey on the BBC, made it his record of the week. The consensus among people who were there is that the broadcasters simply had no idea what the words meant, because the slang belonged to a New York subculture that had not yet reached a studio in London. It reached number 16 in America and number 10 in Britain, the biggest hit Reed ever had by a distance, and it turned a man who had made records for the Velvet Underground that almost nobody bought into a genuine chart artist. American stations were rather more alert and often edited that one line out. Britain sang along to all of it, in the car, on the way to school, for years.
Honey, you take a walk on the wild side. And in public.
Number 2, Brown Sugar, by the Rolling Stones.
Brown sugar, how come you taste so good?
Mick Jagger wrote it in about 45 minutes, reportedly while on location for a film in Australia in 1969. The Stones recorded it at Muscle Shoals in Alabama across 3 extraordinary days. That December, the same sessions that produced Wild Horses, and released it in April 1971 as the first single from Sticky Fingers. It went to number 1 in America and number 2 in Britain, and it opened their concerts for the next 50 years. Almost nobody sang along to what was actually there. The song opens on a slave ship arriving in New Orleans and a slave owner with a whip, and moves from there through interracial sex, and the title itself works simultaneously as a reference to a young black woman and to a variety of heroin. Keith Richards' opening riff is so good that it has functioned, for half a century, as a kind of noise-canceling device over the words. Crowds have bellowed it back in stadiums for decades without parsing a line of it. Jagger has been candid about it in later years. He has said he never would have written it now, and that he can't imagine what possessed him to put all those subjects into one song. He also joked that God knows what he was thinking, and that he'd probably censor himself these days. In 2021, the Stones quietly dropped it from their American tour set list, having opened shows with it for decades. When asked, Richards said they were trying to work out how to bring it back, and expressed some irritation that people were only now noticing what it was about, given that nobody had raised a word of objection at the time. Number 1, Chevy Van, by Sammy Johns. Sammy Johns was a guitar player from Charlotte, North Carolina, who had spent 10 years in a band called the DeVilles, without much to show for it. He had a friend with a Chevrolet van, and he'd been quietly imagining a life for the man who drove one. The result came out on GRC Records, went nowhere in 1973, and was re-released in January 1975. That time it climbed to number 5 on the Hot 100, went gold in May, and eventually sold around 3 million copies. It was the only hit Johns ever had for himself, though he later wrote number 1 country records for Waylon Jennings, Conway Twitty, and John Conlee. On the radio, it sounded like a gentle, sleepy folk rock record about the open road, all soft acoustic guitar and session players from the Wrecking Crew. It is, in fact, a first-person account of a one-night stand with a hitchhiker in the back of a van. And there is a stretch in the middle where the woman falls asleep that reads very differently to modern ears than it did in 1975. Johns himself described the era as one of free love and called himself a conservative hippie. The song was so tied to the culture around it that it turned up in a 1977 film called The Van, which starred a young Danny DeVito, part of a small genre of van pictures the 70s produced, and then quietly forgot. Vans of that description had a nickname at the time, and it wasn't a subtle one. Johns tried re-recording it for the country market in 1988, and it stalled at number 80. He died in 2013 at 66, remembered by most people for one song about one van. If any of these made you rethink something you sang along to for 50 years, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We dig into the stories behind the records you grew up with every week, and we'd love to have you along. And tell us in the comments which song you were shocked to learn the meaning of. Thanks for watching.